I recently saw a post in an active ADHD group that got over 300 comments in less than 24 hours. That question was, what ADHD impulse do you regret the most? Now, I had AI crunch the data because if I was analyzing all of those comments, let's be serious, I'd have 40 tabs open and would probably be an expert in ancient Roman concrete. Okay, back on topic. Today we are counting down the top 10 ADHD impulse regrets that people have based on this post. And I must admit that I feel seen, but sort of in an uncomfortable way. And because we all have ADHD and we have trouble deciding things, there's actually 12 things on this list. There were a few ties, so we're just going to call it the top 10. We will be counting all the way up to number one biggest ADHD impulsive regret. And I must admit that I can relate to most of these. In fact, number one on the list contributed to ruining my dating life in college. Kicking us off at number 10 is hyperfocus, hobby obsession, and starting new projects. We might as well call this the graveyard of abandoned projects. So, of those who commented on impulses they regret, 2% mentioned this. It probably would have been higher, but some may not have had time to comment because they were too busy buying stuff for their new hobby. Coming in at number 9, we have our first tie, sleep disruption, better known as revenge bedtime procrastination, and self-sabotage. Now, these two are best friends. We stay up late just to feel a sense of control, even though we know we're sabotaging tomorrow. Now, if you're watching this at 2 a.m., go to bed. After the video, of course. Coming in at number 8 is online posting and impulsive messaging. This is that risky text, the emotional email to your boss, or the comment you write and then delete 5 seconds later. In fact, 3% of us admitted that our fingers move faster than our frontal lobe. Coming in at number 7, we have another tie. Overthinking, rejection sensitivity, anxiety spirals, and substance use like alcohol, drugs, smoking, and it can go beyond that. I want to pause here for a second on substance use. It's not just about the hard stuff. It's also about the dopamine hunting. For years, I would drink 2 to 4 liters of Dr. Pepper every single day. That is until I had a TIA, otherwise known as a mini stroke, which had a major and profound effect on my life. That's how far our brains will go sometimes to chase that stimulation, whether it's caffeine, cookies, or sugar. It's like the way we medicate our brains. Coming in at number 6 is procrastination. Now, I consider myself an expert when it comes to procrastination. In fact, if there was a PhD in putting things off, I'd earn it. But I'd probably be late in picking up the diploma. How about you? Moving on to number 5, this is the relationship tester, interrupting. Now, 6% of people said that when it comes to ADHD impulse regrets, this was their biggest regret. And it's quite interesting because, at least in my case, here's the trick. Even when I don't interrupt a person verbally, my brain is oftentimes doing it. While a person's talking, I'm already writing the next sentence in my head. I'm physically quiet, but mentally, I might have cut someone off 5 seconds ago because I was terrified that I would lose my next thought. And that brings us to number 4, which is binge eating and cravings, seeking that crunch, the sugar, the texture. And ironically, often it's not hunger that causes us to do that, it's boredom. It's just another way to get the brain to light up, to get that stimulation, that dopamine. Now we get to the top 3 of this list, and we're going to start to see numbers increase here, starting with number 3, which is emotional outbursts. Emotional outbursts are scary because they feel so uncontrollable. I would often have emotional outbursts when I was a kid growing up. And in fact, in high school, once I was kicked out of a championship softball game because I had an emotional outburst. And I love softball a lot, and that kind of had an impact on me. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out why I was having these outbursts. This was long before I was diagnosed with ADHD, and trying to control them, trying to become a calmer person. And even though I've had some success in that area, I find myself even recently having some of these emotional outbursts. There's this individual I work with. I love him like a brother, but he's a money first person. And I'm a guest experience first person. So, whenever I'm planning an event, I am focused on the guest experience and making this the best possible experience a guest can have so that they'll have future loyalty to the event and so that they'll build wonderful memories. This individual is a money first person who wants to, of course, bring in as much money as possible to this volunteer organization. And a lot of times we clash to the point where I will have an emotional outburst against him because I'm strongly fighting for the guest experience and he's strongly fighting for the money. And it's tough. It seems that emotional regulation is often the first fuse that blows when it comes to ADHD. And that brings us to number 2, the dreaded ADHD tax, otherwise known as impulse spending. I am so guilty of this. I don't buy random things. I buy, quote, business investments, end quote. I buy cameras, lenses, and technology, and I tell myself it's for the company, it's to grow my business. I justify it with monthly payments, but those small payments add up to a huge strain. If you have a closet full of business tools that you rarely use, hit that like button so that I know I'm not alone. And finally, the number one impulse mentioned by almost 1 out of every 3 people as their biggest ADHD impulse regret is oversharing and talking too much. In college, way before I was diagnosed with ADHD, a woman asked me out on a date. So we went out and I talked about myself the whole time. My plays, my dreams, my life. I never asked her a single question. And I also never heard from her again. It took me months to realize that being interesting actually means being interested in the other person. Having an aura of mystery about you is actually a good thing. Decades later, I still feel a cringe when I think about that date. We don't do it to be rude. We do it because we're excited to connect. But unfortunately, that often pushes people away. It might feel easy to look at this list and feel broken. But let's remember this: the flip side to impulsivity is spontaneity. The same brain that overshares is the same brain that is deeply authentic and vulnerable. The same brain that impulse buys is the same brain that is extremely creative and curious. We don't want to dry up the river. It's that flow that makes us creative and funny and quick. What we do want to do, though, is build better banks so that we don't flood the village. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Let's remember this: the same brain that can't think of what it's supposed to say next. And I must admit that I could relate to most of these. In fact, number 1 on the list is what contributed to my ruined my dating life. In fact, number 1 on the list is what ruined my dating life in college.